of the Iola Register, and thank you for coming to tonight's forum on the upcoming ballot measure that will change how Kansans select members to the state Supreme Court. I'm eager to hear former Justices Carol Beier and Lee Johnson explain how we got to this point, and why, as Kansas legislators, the only ones in Kansas who can demand a change to the Kansas Constitution, why they called for the special election to do so. As our guest will explain, Kansas has been here before, and as we know, history has a habit of repeating itself, for good and ill. We also have examples of how a different system could go awry. Elections to the Supreme Court in Wisconsin, for example, have become a highly partisan nightmare. Just last year, they had the most expensive judicial campaign in American history, with a record-breaking $114 million spent primarily by special interest groups with no ties to Wisconsin. Through his America PAC, Elon Musk spent more than $25 million on the race for the Wisconsin Supreme Court, including giving voters $100 apiece if they signed a petition against activist judges. And who could forget the $1 million checks he gave 3 Wisconsin citizens for, quote, taking the time to vote. What was supposed to be a nonpartisan race for an officially nonpartisan position has devolved into highly partisan races where candidates' ideologies overshadow their qualifications. In our fair states, the Supreme Court justices are not allowed to accept campaign donations or participate in partisan political activities. They can't attend political conventions, hold party positions, or engage in partisan campaigning. The outcome of the August 4 election could change all this. Here to explain Kansas' system and what's at stake are Carol Beier and Lee Johnson. Justice Beier was appointed to and served on the High Court for 17 years, stepping down in 2020. Before that, she served on the Kansas Court of Appeals from 2000 to 2003. She's from Kansas City, Kansas, attended the Visiting College in Atchison. She graduated from the University of Kansas in 1981 and worked as an editor for the Kansas City Times. She earned her law degree from KU in 1985 and became a partner at the 1000th Street Law Firm in Wichita. Or in Kansas City then. Carol also taught at KU, including designing and teaching a course on women in the law. She was a founding member of the Kansas Women Attorneys Association. Welcome, Justice Beier. Justice Johnson was appointed and served on the Kansas Supreme Court for 12 plus years, stepping down in 2019. Before that, he served on the Kansas Court of Appeals for 6 years, from 2001 to 2007. He was born in Caldwell and is the brother of Iowa's Nana Yoakum. Nana, where are you? Yeah, here. He graduated from KU, served 2 years in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and went to insurance, managing his family's business back in Caldwell. He was also mayor of Caldwell. He earned his law degree from Washington University in 1980. Johnson had a private practice back in Caldwell, and as in most small towns, he served as city attorney for neighboring towns, school districts, and hospitals. His community service included 16 years on the Sumner Mental Health Board, including 1 term as its president. Welcome, Justice. And now I'm going to hand it off. We're going to ping-pong between them, and I'll stay out of the way.
Thank you so much, Susan. Lovely introduction, and lovely kind of quick primer on what we're facing here in Kansas. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here tonight with all of you and talk about the Supreme Court, how it's populated, how we have chosen justice of that town, and what's at stake on August 4th. Okay? Lee and I are going to take turns talking, and we've got our remarks just generally under 3 headings. We're going to talk about what we know about the amendment, the proposed amendment. We're going to talk about what we don't know about it, because there are quite a few unknowns as well. And we're going to talk about the job that we did when we were on the court, what it entails, and the type of person that we all should be looking for to serve on our court. We hope that by the time you leave this gathering tonight, you have a good idea about the 2 methods that you are choosing between, the one that exists now and has existed since the 1950s, on the one hand, or the kinds of elections that we would be having for Supreme Court justices if the amendment passes. We hope you have a good, clear idea about how those differ, and a good, clear idea of how you think it's best to get someone to the court as between the two, given what you'll know then about what the job entails. Okay? We will take questions at the end, but I think he agrees with me. If anyone has a burning question that needs to be asked before we let them off to prepared remarks, please just raise your hand. Feel free. I don't think either one of us might be in the middle of this. Okay, great. All right. So first of all, we're going to talk about what we know about those amendments. Our sponsors tonight have been kind enough to put a printout of the language of the amendment outside the room, and most of you were able to put that. So you a little bit more volume. All right, thanks. First and foremost, the first thing we know about what the amendment would do if it passes is that it would abolish the Supreme Court nominating commission. The commission is really, I call it the heart and soul of merit selection in Kansas. Well, how did we come up with the commission and merit selection in the first place? Back in the 1950s, mid-50s, the governor was defeated in his primary for another term. And so he was sitting there as a lame duck, post-primary, coming up on January, and he leave office. And wasn't very happy, of course, about the fact that he would be succeeded after the general election, and he knew that he would be succeeded by a person from the other party. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice was in poor health, and he had been wanting for a while to retire. That Supreme Court Chief Justice and the governor were good friends and political allies who shared the party. So as the date for the governor to step down approached, they came up with a plan. The governor and the Chief Justice both resigned their positions. I believe that the Chief Justice stepped down on December 31st, and the governor a few days later, with 11 days left on the governor's term. This elevated the lieutenant governor for 11 days to the position of governor. And as one of his few official acts in those 11 days, the new governor, previously the lieutenant governor, accepted the resignation of the Chief Justice and appointed the outgoing governor as the new Chief Justice. This created quite a scandal. It's known as the triple play, and Kansans who, I think you'll all agree with me, like good government, were unhappy. They were unhappy. And there started a movement to come up with a different way of populating our Supreme Court. I regret to inform you that Missouri has taken the lead on this. And back in the 40s, Missouri had a scandal of its own and had come up with a merit selection plan designed to put the biggest emphasis, the largest emphasis in the search for justices on qualifications, hence the name merit selection. And today, nearly 30 or not 30, maybe 31 states, the majority of states use some form of merit selection to choose their Supreme Court justices. And this is the way the Kansas system is designed. The nominating commission, as I said, is kind of its heart and soul. And it is the vetting organization. It is the body that's responsible for letting all the lawyers in the state know that the vacancy is coming up on the court, accepting applications from interested lawyers. I like to say that this is not a situation where a teenager goes up and down the corridor at the mall and stops in at every store and asks if they're hiring. This is quite a bit more complicated. Nowadays, those applications, the submission by an individual lawyer interested in serving on the court, can run as long as 100 pages. So the applications are extremely comprehensive, very rigorous, and they ask all kinds of questions, kind of the usual resume type questions. Where did you go to school? How did you do in school? Where did you practice? Etc. But they also ask them to list any references, including judges they've appeared in front of and opposing counsel in their cases. So they're pretty searching. My personal favorite among the questions on the application asked me to name my 5 most significant cases. And I like that question because the word significant is not defined. It's left to be defined by the person answering the question. And I remember having a mix of cases. I talked about a case that was worth a lot of money, but I also talked about a case that I took on behalf of a public school student who needed special services in order to get an education. So I thought those answers in particular would be revealing about the way various candidates for the job were wired and what they consider significant in the practices. So those applications come in, and the commission evaluates the applications and conducts interviews in an open session. You can go attend the meeting if you like, or you can watch online, they're live streamed, or you can watch the archived version of the meeting that is later available for any Kansas citizens to avail themselves of. That commission is very important to explain. That commission is made up of 9 of your fellow citizens, 9 of your fellow Kansans. 4 of the members of the commission are from each of the 4 congressional districts, and they are people who are not lawyers. 4 lay people who are not lawyers, who are appointed by the governor in succeeding years. So, for example, this year, the governor will select a person from the Big First congressional district to serve on the nominating commission. 4 other members of the commission are lawyers who also come from each of the 4 congressional districts. So those 4 lawyers are selected by their fellow lawyers, people admitted to practice law and residing in each of the congressional districts. And like the laypersons who are appointed by the governor, those lawyers also come to the commission in succeeding years. So again, this year, the Big First, the lawyers in the Big First who reside there, who are admitted to practice in Kansas, will select one of their peers to serve on the commission. It's important to note that staggering of arrival times on the commission, because one thing that tells you that those who designed this system limited the political influence that could be wielded by any one governor by making it impossible for a new governor to come into office and immediately appoint 4 members of the commission from the lay population. That governor needs to take 4 full years before the governor gets all 4 seats on the commission filled. The 9th member of the commission is also a lawyer, and that person is elected by all of their lawyer peers in Kansas. So that is a statewide ballot by all of the lawyers in Kansas. And I believe that seat, in fact, I'm quite certain that seat comes up at the same time as the 4th congressional district seat. So those are the people who serve on the nominating commission. and they're the ones responsible for advertising the vacancy, taking in the applications, vetting the applicants. I mentioned that the applications, the submissions include candidates' references, both legal world references and the rest of the world references. And like all job applications, candidates make sure to include the names of people who are likely to say lovely things about them, as we all do when we're trying to get a job, right? But that commission doesn't stop. Even when the application stretches to 100 pages, that commission doesn't stop with what they see in front of them. The period between the time the applications are submitted and the interviews I described, those commissioners are out finding other people who know candidates and asking about their experience with them. So it's a very searching, very thorough vetting process. You come to the interview, the 9-person interview, and then the commissioners in public session cast their ballots among the candidates. And they cast as many ballots as it takes to arrive at the 3 top names that are then submitted to the governor. So that's how the commission is populated, that's how it generally works. He's going to talk a little more about how it functions in his personal experiences with that process.
Thank you, Carol. I'll try not to repeat your comprehensive description. But first I wanted to point out that, our system to ensure justices are selected based on qualifications and not political connections has been in place for about 2/3 of a century, which brings to mind the old admonition, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so I think what you need to decide is it broke? And if you think there's something broken about it, is the election method to solve the problem. I personally served with 15 other Court of Appeals judges in my 6 years. I was in a high turnover period. I served with 9 other Supreme Court justices who had all gone through the same process through, I think, maybe 4 different governors. And I can tell you, each one of those people were competent jurists. They were collegial. Not that I agreed with all of them. We had some very heated discussions, as Carol can attest, but we all left it in the room, went to lunch together, didn't make it personal, and they all understood their role, the job that they were to do. And, I can tell you, for all of us, there wasn't a docket that went by that we didn't have to decide a case different than we wanted to. Carol will hit on that a little bit later. So, as she indicated, I'm going to try to go through a little bit from the perspective of applicants. Actually, a nominee, but I've been through it 3 times. Twice in the Court of Appeals, and once in the Supreme Court, twice in the Court of Appeals because some smart woman beat me out the first time. No figures to be pointed. No, Governor Creitz smartly appointed Carol the first time I went up and so.
We should probably mention that the Court of Appeals method has changed. When you and I were appointed back in the early aughts, the Court of Appeals selection was exactly like the Supreme Court. That has since been changed because the Court of Appeals is a creature of statute rather than a constitutional body, a constitutional design body, and so that was changed back in the, I think during the round of registration.
I'm Monday over in baseball, and my memory's not so good, so I'm going to interject something here in case I can get to say it later. And that begs the question of why isn't the Court of Appeals included? If it's so important to elect justices, The Court of Appeals handles 10 times the case. They have to take every appeal. When we were on the Court of Appeals, they were taking 2,000 cases a year. And some of them are reviewed, but it was like 5%. So for most cases that go before the Court of Appeals, they're recorded the last resort. There's no appeal, nothing. So they affect many more thousands of citizens than the Supreme Court. So why isn't it important to do that? Something to think about. And also, what about the district courts? Half of the district courts in the state of Kansas have merit selection. They apparently are going to stay merit selection. And they're your local people. They're the people that you're more likely to be impacted with. So anyway, I'll just throw that out. Those are questions that popped in my mind when they first came up with this. You know, they tried to change the method about as long as I was on the court, a couple of decades. But this is the first time they've gone back to the 1950s election. And but they could never get it done before. I like to think there were enough common sense people in the legislature that believed in that they would fix it. But anyway, it's here now. The first thing that happens after the opening is discovered by the clerk of the appellate court, notifies the chairman of the nominating commission, they get the logistics together, when they're going to have a deadline for applications. And then they send a notice to every active Kansas attorney. In my day, it was a postcard, now it's an email. And that notice says, in addition to this notifying of the vacancy, tells where to get an application for. Back then, it was you go to your local court, like they can go down to the courthouse here in Iola County and pick up an application, or from the appellate clerk's office. Where it has to go, and how many copies it has to be accompanied by, and the date it has to be submitted by. There's no filing fee, there's no petition with signatures that have to be submitted, there's no declaration of party affiliation, you don't have to belong to the Kansas Bar Association to apply, you don't even have to be a registered voter, as far as I know, to apply. So even a right-handed kid from Caldwell can fill out an application and have a chance to get on the appellate course. And to me, that's about as democratic as you get. But as Carol indicated, filling out the application is no easy task. It's very complicated. I was going to review some of that, but she's told you enough about what's in the comprehensive nature of that. But it behooves an applicant or a nominee to be candid, because the nominating commission will get an official credit report. They'll get a KBI criminal history report. They'll get a report from the disciplinary administrator of any ethical complaints that didn't follow the issue. And if that wasn't, you have to divulge your net worth and your most significant assets and that sort of thing. But if that isn't enough, at the end, you sign a consent and a waiver of privilege that says the nominating commission can get any information about you that they want. So I got typical people would say, I voted for you, Johnson, but I voted no on everyone else that was on the ballot because I didn't know anything about them. And I said, well, that's okay, because the nominating commission and the governor knew more than they needed to know about the government of the authority because of that. I think Carol hit upon the interviews with the nominating commission.
Did you prior to going before the nominating commission, did you ever did an interview by 9 people at one time?
No.
Nor had I. It's a bit intimidating. Yeah.
The interviews.
Yes.
Are they open to the floor or are they behind closed doors?
They are. They are.
They're not only an open forum now, they're live streaming archives. You can, I don't know when they started archiving, but you can go back and watch the interviews.
Old interviews. And there's a process right now to fill the seats that's being vacant. It's now vacant because of our immediate past Chief Justice Bowlus' retirement. And so there will be interviews on the 21st of this month. If you all want to watch, you can. I mean, you can obviously go all the way to Topeka and come to the room and watch if you choose. But most people can't drop everything in their lives to do that. But you can watch them in real time, or you can watch them after the fact if you like. And I should say this, I didn't say it. The nominating commission is happy to hear from anyone. So whether they come looking for you or not, if you have thoughts about individual applicants, you can get in touch with the commission. You can write a letter. You can call a member of the commission. Their names are available on the kssports.gov website. So you can communicate. They welcome input from any member of the public on the nominees. And those nominees, a list of those will publish as soon as those applications are the list can have it's published in the website.
Along those lines, I had a commissioner, I didn't think it was appropriate to have letters of recommendation sent to the nominating commission, because this is totally a
Back then it wasn't done.
check. But anyway, I am one of the commissioners telling me that he had received more contacts about me than he ever had before. And I said, I just hope they're good.
That would be the obvious next question.
Yeah. So it does happen. So they do have unsolicited comments that's considered. And I was going through something I picked up on the notification on the website, Kansas website, and they have a list in there the considerations that the nominating commission take into account when they're picking the 3 that they're going to send to the governor. And let me just indulge me here. Legal and judicial experience, obviously. Educational background, character and ethics, temperament, service to the community, impartiality, and the respect of colleagues. And no time does it say party affiliation, conservative or liberal. In fact, the chairman of the nominating commission will make certain that the commissioners don't ask questions along that line. And we both, as departmental justices, had to chair nominating commissions for district court. I did it here in Allen County. And that's one thing we have to make clear to the laypersons that are on those commissions. You can't ask certain questions. And partisan questions are
And there, as our, I'm sure all of you have probably seen at least snippets of the federal system when U.S. Supreme Court justices are being, are subject to approval. They have to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. And I'm sure you've also observed that some of the senators might ask questions about how they might rule on an XYZ issue. Those questions are going to get asked either, because that's simply not relevant to whether a person is qualified to do the job. And that's part of Kansas historical allegiance to the idea that partisan politics don't have any place in the judiciary. I want to mention one other real quick thing. Oh, yeah, sure.
When it's presented to governor, does the governor ask those questions
No,
with the finalists?
no.
I was going to talk about that later when I talk about the governor's interview, but I interviewed twice with Governor Graves and once with Kathleen Speed. Actually, I interviewed with Governor Finney way back for the district court judge. But Graves and Speed I don't think, I've tried to think of anything they asked me that might have hinted at being partisan. And I can't, they obviously didn't ask how you can vote on something. They didn't try to say who's your favorite Supreme Court justice and figure out if you're liberal or conservative or, they were most interested in your work ethic, your writing ability, just when I was before Governor Studious, I've been on the Court of Appeals. She wanted to know if I worked in play well with my colleagues, because they're very important on the Supreme Court. And those kind of things. And both governors were that way. I spent an hour, my first interview with Governor Graves, and you talk about Enoch, and you walk into the governor's office and you're there for an hour. His biggest concern was what do people in Colorado do if I pull you into the video?
And one I wonder too, is sort of everything involved.
Anyway, did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's certainly my experience too. I interviewed with both of those governors. And no questions about party, no questions trying to discern, nothing that sounded like you're tricky at the time how it's likely to rule on any particular issue. Which is different than what we see in the federal system.
Yes.
You can take questions in the middle of all this because they're brilliant speakers and really appreciate that. My question is, when Chris Black and Ty Masterson were in the committee last year for 2025 listed session, why? Why is this the most important thing to bring up? Why do they want to have, kind of like a party system for Supreme Court judges?
Can you repeat your question?
Yeah.
I would ask, why did Ty Masterson and Chris Beier, our Attorney General, why are they pushing this?
Obviously, I'm in their head, and I would not attempt to answer, but for the fact that I think both gentlemen have told us why they're interested in having elections for Kansas Supreme Court justices. We're going to talk a little more about what the job entails and what have you, but the bottom line is they've been unhappy with some decisions from the court. I would suggest that all of us are sometimes unhappy with decisions from the court, and if we loved every single one unreservedly, then we might be looking at something broken. Because the court shouldn't be looking to us to make the calls. They make the calls based on other information that's appropriate for them to base this decision on. But they have expressed that if they don't get the decisions that they want from the court, then maybe we just have to change the court, change the personnel. And this is one way to do it.
That's an ethics value that kind of like, it's kind of like a power thing, correct? So like I can get what I want, so I throw a tantrum. I know that I can interpret the law the way that I want and make this kind of available. So my question kind of is like, it sounds ethically illegal.
I don't know that it's illegal, it's political. Yeah, I think it's political pretty plainly, pretty brazenly partisan political. And not completely partisan, some of it issue-based rather than party-based, but I'm not saying, I'm not guessing. I'm repeating to you what has been said in public settings. You want to talk about the process? One other point I want to make on process too, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, we skipped all around, so I just want to make one more point about the process. After you make the top three to go see the governor, your work has just begun. you have to fill out a KBI background exam form, and you just thought the application was comprehensive. It is very detailed. You gotta give them your fingerprints and all of that, and they assign an agent that will go out, nose around, look for their, the first time I went through that, I was in Caldwell, I had a number of people come up to me and say, "What do you do, Joe?" I said, "I had a KBI agent asking that." Yeah, and I had another farmer say that the agent came out, caught him, and rounded him up in the ground top, sat down for an hour, and he said, "He was kind of looking for bad stuff on him." Personal, in other words, hey, he wasn't looking at what kind of attorney he is, what's his character. And so it's comprehensive.
It continues even after the question, even after the question. So the first two things we really want you to hear about this, the first two things that we know about this amendment, it abolished the commission, it abolished that very rigorous netting process, but it also abolished gubernatorial appointment.
And the KBI background checks will go along with it.
All of that was describing, kind of remembering, having flashbacks to how an intimidating process can be, that would all go away. Yeah.
So if you were to ask, if this passes, it goes through, who could apply to run? I mean, to run the Supreme Court.
That we're going to talk about what we don't know, and that's one of the things I was going to discuss is we don't know if you have a filing fee, if they're going to have primaries or anything. The actual explanation says that the quote, "the rules applicable for such elections and the designation of position numbers shall be provided by law," unquote, which means that they will tell us later how we need to do it.
And it will be within the power. It'll be within the power of the legislature to make all those rules. So we know that it abolished the nominating commission. This is one last point I want to make about the nominating commission because there's a common misconception that I went so carefully through how people end up on the commission because I want you to understand it yourself and please tell all your friends and neighbors and family members. The Kansas Bar Association is a wonderful organization. I've been a member since I was in law school, and I'm sure Lou's been a member for many years. It's a wonderful organization, but it's a voluntary bar association whose members are self-selected to join the organization. The KBA does not control who sits on the nominating commission.
They don't have any input.
They have no input at all, other than whatever input they want to volunteer like all the rest of us. But many people have said, just have this misconception, it's the KBA, it's not the KBA, it's all lawyers in the state who vote on the chair. It's the lawyers in the individual congressional district who vote on the squad members, and then the governor selects the members. I just want to make sure everybody understands that. Okay, so no more nominating commission, no more gubernatorial appointment, and the third leg of the merit selection stool, so okay, I'm going to go into that shortly, is retention elections. Now, you all voted in these elections, you may or may not remember. The question on your ballot, it'll have a position number. As it happens, my position number when I was still on the court was number 1, which has nothing to do with anything. It's just, I succeeded a person who had position number 1.
It's in the Secretary of State's office, and you're listed on the ballot in order of your position, but that's the only time we even know. Every 6 years we figure out what our number is to get this on.
Exactly. Until I walked into the voting booth myself and saw it, I didn't know it was my number. So it's just, they're arbitrary and inherent are subject to change. So at any rate, but it would just say, shall Carol Beier be retained in office? And so I don't have an opponent. I don't declare a party. I don't have my party listed with me on the ballot. And you just vote yes or no. And in order to be retained in office, a justice must receive 50% plus 1 vote in order to be retained in office. 50% plus 1 vote. Those retention elections for a long time, were fairly sweeping affairs. They were fairly sweeping affairs. You know, nobody got too worked up about it. You got on the court, you felt pretty sure that unless some horrible thing had happened or you had done some horrible thing, that you would be detained pretty easily. That is definitely no longer the case. It hasn't been the case for several cycles now. And I had the distinction, actually in 2010, of being one of the first justices where there was an actual challenge with some money behind it mounted to retention. Now those retentions have become real contests in which candidates who are on either side of the issue, whether they should be retained or put out to pasture, have an opportunity to have their say. So those retentions are a real thing.
That was because of your name.
I had the misfortune of having my name rhyme with the word fire. But at any rate, which I learned or thought about for the first time when I was eating my lunch at my desk one day and heard people chanting outside. So those retention races are real contests. They're real contests. And Kansas have a chance. They have the first opportunity to pass on a new nominee or a new justice in the first general election after that justice has served 1 year. So every person who's appointed to the Kansas Supreme Court must sit for retention in the first general election that follows 1 year of service on the bench. Last summer, Larkin Walsh was appointed to succeed Justice Evelyn Johnson. She was sworn in before November, so she is among those that we need to sit on this general election ballot coming up. Okay? And then after that, if the justice is retained, from that point forward, the justice must sit for retention every 6 years. District judges, trial judges, and Court of Appeals judges, it's a 4-year term. The first Supreme Court justice is a 6-year term. So we also know that retention elections would go away. You have another question?
Well, so there's no other retention, but unless you're something really bad, you're pretty sure you didn't close that in.
Well, yes and no. That's what I mean about real contests. In the recent past, starting in 2010, so every couple of years, there may be some justices and Court of Appeals judges on the ballot, as well as district judges. People have been putting money into those. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
In 2014, up until probably 9 or 10 o'clock, or maybe later, I was behind. I was behind 50%. I ended up with 52.6%. And Justice now Chief Rosen was up and out with me. He beat me. We got 52.8. But we were both right after the Carr brothers, and there was a it gives you
The governor's race was happening that year, and the governor made an issue.
yeah, and Governor Brown told everyone not to vote for us, and it gives you if you feel it, you drive down the turnpike back to Topeka and go out to Kansas Star and see a big billboard that says Johnson Rosen vote now.
So there are campaigns now.
Kansas is like everywhere else. Anybody has to put money into to recall someone. Is that right? There's no restrictions for.
No, so the advocate is sworn against retention ever since 2010. And people, dodge the board one side to the other. Now, this is complicated for justices, as you can imagine, because justices themselves can do very little to help themselves. I mean, we used to say, one of our colleagues used to say that justices and appellate judges as well, we have to show our work. So every time we make a decision, you need your opinion that you can read. They're all on the website, you can read them, you can see this is well reasoned or it's not, whatever, we have to show our work. But really, for the most part, other than educating the public about how the system works, justices can't do much to support their own retention.
So someone can actively campaign against you, but you have to kind of sit quiet.
the most part, you point to your decisions and say, I've written this many times and what have you, and you can talk about the process, but you're really not committed, certainly not committed to campaigning in any kind of partisan way.
But Carol, you show your work, but you can't defend your work.
That's kind of the
You
way
know,
to put it,
and,
yeah. Yeah, you can't do much to defend it other than say, see my opinion. Yeah.
So I have a great reason because I have lost on something, and you vote one way on
Some cases you care about.
right. And I don't know what party you're with. That would, I could just get together with a lot of people money and
Try to defeat the person for retention. Yeah. That's part of the current system. So it is kind of difficult sometimes when you're trying to find that position. Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is the way, has that ever happened?
Has anyone in the Kansas Supreme Court lost their senior retention? Not yet.
So even with advertising campaigns and
The lowest,
campaigns that line,
the
it
lowest,
just never happened.
the lowest that it had was in that
And you know what I
2015
say to that, when I was hit with that, well, that's never happened before. I said, that's a testament to the nominating commission and gave you out a background check and the governor's desire to get the best justices on the court.
Could it also
I
not,
don't know the system. That's what I'm getting at.
That's what he's saying. Yeah.
could it also not be a feature of the system that's ineffective, that people don't know when they're voting, there's so many candidates, you got a few key candidates that you are prepared to vote for, and then there's a whole list of all these people and say, you know, I say it's not a very effective system, because you think if it was an effective system, sometimes people get recalled. I mean, the other option is to get through your candidate.
Other people have lost their seats. There have been people who lose in lower courts. It has happened. And I understand your point that someone might make that argument. But the problem is low information, right? And the way to address low information is to get more information out there. And we had a Cadillac judicial evaluation system for a period of time that was funded by the legislature. Because they realized that these tended to be low information races and voters wanted more information about their judges and justices. But someone figured out that having a Cadillac evaluation system to which all the public had access was a support of the retention design, a support of the merit selection system we had. And they really wanted to get rid of it. And so Creitz had money there. And we have had various iterations of evaluations since. This is another place where the KDA comes back in. The Kansas Bar Association does publish evaluations of sitting justices who are up for retention. So there is a place online that you can go to read about evaluations of the judges. But we need to get the word out that that's available to people. I agree with you that getting more information out there is a really valuable thing.
Yeah, when I was on the Court of Appeals, I lobbied, or I didn't lobby, I testified before the legislature in favor of the evaluation because special interest groups were putting out their evaluation of, at that time I was on the Court of Appeals, and the Chamber of Commerce would give you a bad evaluation if you voted against something that was anti-business, regardless of the issue. And so to counteract the special interest, I wanted an objective evaluation. Plus, I got tired of people saying, I don't know which one to vote for because I'm just not going to vote for either, or I'm going to vote for no, all of them. And then I could tell them, go look at the evaluation and pick out the best one if you want to be an informed voter. But during that particular period, they got rid of it by defunding.
Right, you got defunded.
So how will things change if it's let's go.
Well, what will happen is that we'll just have statewide elections for all your justices. We'll just have statewide elections. And one of the things that the amendment that we do know about it is that it explicitly does away with all of the current prohibitions on Kansas Supreme Court justices' partisan activity. When I was on the bench, and he was on the bench, pretty much the only thing we could do was vote. I mean, we couldn't declare our party, we couldn't campaign under a party label, we couldn't support anyone else who was running. I couldn't donate any money, couldn't have yard signs, I mean, all the sort of things that people do when they're supporting a candidate, we couldn't do any of that, not for ourselves, not for anyone else. And the amendment specifically lists all of those restrictions on partisan activity. That's important to know because the amendment is formally, you mentioned Wisconsin, the amendment is formally silent on whether these statewide elections are going to be partisan or nonpartisan. It's formally silent on that. But there's really no point in listing all of those restrictions on partisan activity, including specifically saying justices can be party officers. So they not only can they declare a party and campaign as a party member, but they can be officers in parties. There's no point to doing that unless you're planning on making these elections partisan. So that's what we get, statewide elections instead. And Susan already said it, but I'll just emphasize it again. There's one more thing to know. They are expensive. And Wisconsin is the poster child, frankly, for this right now. They have a nominally nonpartisan statewide election of Supreme Court justices. Nominally nonpartisan. We all know, since we read the paper, or read the web, we all know that in 2025, one seat in Wisconsin was up. One seat, two candidates. One allied with the Democrats, one allied with the Republicans. And that amount of money was spent over $100 million on one seat in Wisconsin. Well, look around you. I'm looking around my neighborhoods in Topeka. No one's writing $1 million checks. Most places in Kansas don't have a lot of people who can write $1 million checks to support judicial candidates. Or Wisconsin. So that money is coming from interest groups, especially out-of-state donors. Out-of-state donors, the percentage of out-of-state money in their Wisconsin race was huge. So really, one of the things you presented with in this election, I'm going to give you 1 second. One of the things you presented with is, we talk about the franchise. It's sacred to us, right? It is. I mean, voting is a positive thing. Voting is good, right? But you want to be the ones who buy your votes or really selecting serves. And if the only way that someone can get elected is to have millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, are you really choosing them or someone else? What's your question, sir?
I hate that I get millions of dollars, to influence things. But what if the partisanship is just inevitable? Even if you don't disclose your partisan leanings, you're still have your partisan beliefs, your worldview, and it influences how you think, and it influences how you decide. So
that's where I'm going to stop you right there. The job of the judge is to put those things aside, and not just their partisanship, not just judges of whatever party they happen to belong to, but even their personal code of ethics. When judges decide, judges are fundamentally different from other people in public service. They're fundamentally different. When we elect a partisan actor for the legislative branch or the executive branch, as voters, exercising this sacred franchise, as voters, we have a right to expect, and I say we can demand that that person adhere to the preferences of constituents. Right? They put a representative in representing the government. We expect that they're going to adhere to constituent preferences. We want them to act in accordance with party platforms. That's why people write them. And we want them to adhere to their own personal ethics and moral code, whatever they told us about on the campaign trail will guide their action. When we're talking about partisan actors in those two branches of government, representative branches of government. That's what they should be doing. Judges are completely different. When a judge decides a case or sifts through one of thousands of petitions for review, like our court does, when they are doing the substantive work of the court, deciding cases, judges look at three things. That's it. They look at the facts as demonstrated to exist by admissible evidence. They look at the issues, the legal issues that are framed by the parties and their counsel. And then they look at the governing law. Now, I've made that sound simple. I am not suggesting that AI can do the job, because it's complicated. There are disputes on all of those three things. There are heated discussions, as we made reference earlier. But what they don't look at is constituent preferences, party platforms, even their own preferences. We mentioned earlier that not a document went by when he or I or anyone else serving on these two appellate courts, and just specifically focused on screens tonight, not a document went by where I didn't cast votes that I wish I didn't have to cast as a person. But what I wanted as a person, whether I was a Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever, for whatever reason, simply was irrelevant. It's a hard thing to do. Sometimes you don't sleep very well. But that's what you're charged with doing on the court. Gentlemen, behind you, that question, I'm going to go to him first.
It's a bit of a rhetorical question, but there's a saying, who watches the watches? And so I'm thinking about the selection committee that the governor appoints, correct?
Of course not. She
So she has some partisan beliefs. And I'm wondering what your perspective is on how do you take the partisanship out of the selection committee when the selector of the selectors is in fact also partisan?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I don't mean to
Staggering is on it.
Staggering the House.
Because the newly elected governor after
takes 4 years to get 40
It
years.
has an interesting history in being Republican, but selected a Democratic governor. I was a bit of a moderation.
It goes back and forth.
every other one, there was an article in the paper about that.
Yeah, so for years and years and years, for decades, it's kind of changing. Yeah, no, it's a valid question, and I don't think either you or I are sitting here tonight saying our system is perfect. I don't think we're saying that. There are probably modifications, reforms that would improve it, would make it even better than what we think it is now. We're willing to have that conversation, absolutely willing, including maybe some adjustment in how that works. But throwing the whole system out in favor of statewide elections that look like the people are having power, but really are handing over, just kind of renting a huge thing for our state to billionaires, seems like a bad idea.
So who's going to do the vetting? And just anyone can run to be a Supreme Court justice under this?
The qualifications, the minimum set of qualifications for Kansas Supreme Court justice is truly minimum. It's 10 years of practice, 10 years of experience. You could be a law professor, practitioner. 10 years, 30 years old. You have to be pretty professional to have gotten 10 years and about 30. So 10 years practice, 30 years old, and admitted to practice in Kansas. So one of the questions I've been getting, as I've been out chatting with people this year, is what about somebody who's admitted to practice, because you can be admitted to practice in Kansas without ever actually having practiced here. So we know we're going to have, if we have elections, statewide elections, we know we're going to have a lot of money coming in from out of state. Mine actually has 3 more justices coming in who barely reside here. Moved in for a few months, file your paperwork, or file your whatever's going to be required, and then practice the Supreme Court.
And there's not going to be a background check or anything like that?
Well, I mean, obviously parties vet candidates, so I'm not sure that would happen, but are they vetting them for the things we're talking about, that not justices to be able to do? that's really where we wanted to end up, is who do we want to serve? Who do we want to serve?
I think one of the things I was thinking about in the legislature, people are complaining about the heavy influence of the metropolitan areas because demographically, they have more people, so they have more representatives. And so if we eliminate the commission, all that geographic representation that we now have will be lost.
It could be. I think it's very easy. And I'll let you answer the question. I think it's very easy to envision a time, not very far off in the future, that if we go statewide elections, we have 7 justices from across the county.
Can I add some, absolutely, we're talking about millions of dollars, even if it's just campaign, then you're gonna do away with the Lee Johnsons of the world, because I was at a sole practitioner practice. There's no way I could have taken the time off to raise money, to go campaign, even if someone was raising money for me, I couldn't have campaigned. And, you know, I didn't have any associates or junior partners or anything like that, so you're gonna eliminate the rural areas and eliminate the sole practice in the urban areas, and in addition to those that aren't wealthy enough to do it.
Right. But I'm gonna address that pragmatic question on both sides, both the candidate side and the actual justices themselves. I'm gonna address that just what's humanly possible. What can be done in a 24-hour period? As a candidate, I mean, I think you all probably know this, but I've been reminded of it recently. I heard a candidate in a statewide race just the other day speaking. And he said that particular day, he had spent 6 hours on the phone trying to raise money. And he had a lot of other support, but he had spent 6 hours that day trying to raise money for his case. Okay, so that's as a candidate. As a Supreme Court justice, I'm here to tell you, and I know we'll be backing up on this, it is way more than a full-time job to be a Supreme Court justice. Not only do you decide the cases, you know, that actually come to you, and you hear all argument, and you conference and you write decisions, you do that. You sift through literally thousands of petitions for review from Court of Appeals cases every year. You have a huge administrative task. I was completely ignorant about this. I sat three in some years, I sat one floor below the Supreme Court in the Judicial Center, and I had no idea that the Kansas Supreme Court is essentially the board of directors for the judicial branch. When I left, when we and I were leaving, we had more than 250 judges statewide, and we had more than 1,600 non-judicial employees statewide. That's a big organization to run. And the board of directors for an organization that size has to spend a fair amount of time working on some of our problems, promulgating and amending and watchdogging all the rules that govern how cases are decided in Kansas. Governing the practice of law. We administered the bar exam. We ran the disciplinary systems for both judges and lawyers. We ran all the continuing education for judges and lawyers, etc. I go on with this point on.
Liaison.
Yes. Liaison, Department of Justice for so many districts, liaison with all kinds of boards, committees, and commissions. So the administrative burden is huge. And frankly, we took on extra during our season of I'll be right to you, because we went out in front of the public a lot, way more than we had in the past, which I think is an important part of the job of the justice as well. So I put this to you. A candidate has to spend 6 hours a day, or something like that, every day raising money. Do you want your justices to do the work I just described? Or do you want them to have to be forever campaigners and money raisers instead of doing the people's business that they're there to do?
In every political campaign, statewide, nationwide, everywhere, you have this elite committee. This knows more about what's going on with the interest of the job, like any other. Now, if you are electing judges, you're going to have that too. You're going to have this elite group, it'd be awful easy for that, because they're the ones that vested there.
Yeah.
So you're gonna be.
This is the worst of the nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
Is that once you have to go through this process to get your seat, as opposed to the process we previously described that we have now. You would like to think that you would do the job the way that I've described it needs to be done properly, but it takes a pretty strong person to not.
If I gave me $10 million, I'd think twice about what they were saying.
Well, I mean, when they show up in court, I mean, in West Virginia, there's a gentleman who took a lot of money from a particular business interest in his race to get on the court. He got on the court, a case involving that company came before him, he refused to recuse from the case. He sat on the case, and went all the way up to Supreme Court, and they said, no, you can't do that. I mean, you can't do that. But the potential for that is frightening.
Carol, the other push or the other consideration is that most of the people that weren't practicing country law, which allows you to practice in genteel poverty, if you work for a big firm, you took a pay cut to go on the Supreme Court, and if you're going to be gone, you've lost your place in the big firm, you've lost all of the contacts, and so.
As soon as it becomes known that you're a candidate, you don't have any clients anymore, right? I will comment on the pay cut, right? I mean, if we look deeper into this kind of forever argument that somehow we should have a different system. I mean, there has been some effort over the last 15 or 20 years to make the job unattractive. While Lee and I were on the court, we went without any kind of pay raise for 9 years. When I left my firm in Wichita to go be on the Court of Appeals, I took a 1/3 pay cut. I never got back to my salary. In all the time, the 20 years I served, I never got back to what I was earning when I left the private sector.
So you were a real public servant.
That's why I was there. And just on the question about, what the governors would ask and talk about during the interviews, this is just kind of a funny little anecdote, maybe we'll wrap up. And we had a great conversation, and we can continue as long as you all want to, but I don't want to keep you longer than we promised. When I went into Governor Creitz' office to interview, and this was for my Court of Appeals seat, I had maybe met him once or twice, but governors meet thousands and thousands of people. It wasn't like I expected to remember me really. But when I came in, I said, hello, nice to see you. The last time I saw you, we were both long distance runners at the time. You were passing me in the Wichita River Run, and I wasn't very happy about it. And so that led to a discussion of the person he was running with, who was a mutual friend, and who happened to be a gentleman in Wichita that he did a lot of charity work with, which led to a discussion of public service. I think that's why I got the job. I mean, I really do think everybody's called these jobs, and he did everything. And he's done and did everything, right? I was competing against this impossible competitor, but I think I got the job because we had that 2 or 3 minutes, of little human connection. And I think that has value too.
The United States definitely needs more people who are public servants rather than anyone who are on the It's a noble thing.
What are your greatest fears? Both of you. If this passes, what are your greatest fears?
You want to go first? You want to go first?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is kind of the things we touched on, that the race has become unfathomably expensive, that there's no choice if you want to be on the court, but to take, millions and millions of dollars from people who couldn't give a fig about cases. Yeah, go ahead, Lee.
My biggest fear is that there won't be justices that will experience the awesome thing about practicing with intelligent people that are all in it for one purpose, to get it right. And that you can have some awesome, vehement arguments, but it's never personal. And the intellectual exercise is awesome. And if we're all partisan and everyone knows how the next person's going to vote and you go into conference, you're going to miss that. There's times that you go in and you're certain you're going to vote one way. And Carol gets to talk and her favorite thing to say when she and I were on the same side, she'd say, "Lady, one, shut up." Don't say anything more.
So, I value the institution a lot, and I do love this kind of approach that the institution does, kind of gets to make lawyers really great thinkers and justices and stuff like that. So I kind of want to take an approach where I like to be able to ask this like a Socratic question, kind of on the basis of, you can correct me on this or what you think, but I want to ask the question kind of that takes emotion, like labels, politics out of it to get to like down to like the foundational attributes of what this amendment really is. So I kind of came up with this question, how do we fund those budgets? So what is more dangerous to a free society? Judges who are insulated from voters, or judges who are influenced by voters and money?
I would say probably the latter, and that's because of what I said a moment ago about the judges who are adhering to their oaths to uphold the state and federal constitutions and to treat everyone who comes before them as an equal participant in society. And that is their obligation. And they are not supposed to be influenced by voters in performing that task. They're just not supposed to be. And it's hard. I mean, when you know you're up for retention and you know that there are already people out there who are opposing your retention or are going to be unhappy with that vote you just passed, it's hard because it's your obligation. And if you don't fulfill an obligation, you're not adhering to your oath.
You know, Chief Justice Lawton Nuss heard me say even guilty persons are entitled to a fair trial. The 14th Amendment that applies to the 5th Amendment fair trial rights to the states says any person. It doesn't say any innocent person. It doesn't even say any U.S. citizen. It says any person is entitled to due process of law. And so there's sometimes when you have to grant a new trial for a pedophile that did horrible things because the trial is unconstitutionally unfair. And you have to go home and try to get straight. And so, you know, it's back where we were saying there's times when you have to vote.
When I was talking about the difference in jobs earlier, I think this is a good way to, for me, it's kind of a visual way of thinking about it. When you serve in the legislature, when you're an executive, you're a policymaker. That's what you're doing, right? You're making public policy, making and executing public policy. And so you begin the enterprise with a goal, with a goal, with the results that you want to achieve. And you come up with pathways to get there, because the goal is paramount. When a judge sits down to decide a case, they don't start with the result. They start with those building blocks, those 3 building blocks. And then they get to the result. And then that result is what needs to happen. But they don't pick the result and then reason backwards or come up with pathways to get where they want to go, which is why you can have a position we was just describing, and I've already discussed too, this, that you end up voting in ways that maybe you don't want to as a person or as a party member or whatever. I mean, whatever hat you know you wear in your life, in your head, you're not permitted to bring us to your own case decision making.
And we know that's idealistically true, and I'll agree with that, and I'll hope that all judges are like that. But we know just from the United States Supreme Court that people predictably fall into different camps because of their worldview. And then there are some decisions that aren't based on worldview, you know, the flip side and surviving results and different things. But usually on the landmark cases, on the big important things, it's pretty divided. You can call it whatever you want, but we can see how it goes. And if you compare the Democrat platform to the history of the court, or the Republican platform to the history of the court, you could say it leans more this way or that way. It's partisan. It's inevitably partisan. It's inevitably partisan because, you know, just the decisions are what they are.
I think you're right. I think you're right about some of your observations. I would say that part of that goes back to how they get there. Part of it goes back to how they get there, and that's what we're here about tonight. How do people get there? What do we think is, what of the two options we're presented with? We're not talking about other country reforms that might be related. We're talking about the two options we're presented with on August 4th. I think the choice is pretty clear. Dan, you have a question? You had your hand up? Did you want to ask a question?
If I understand what you said, all three that are sent to the governor are good.
Yeah, they get the best folks.
Even if good, bad, or test, you're gonna get good.
The system is set up so that the governor has a hard time making a mistake.
Governor Creitz told me that. He said, you know, I'm not concerned about, you know, I want to talk to people, I want to get all my information, but I'm not concerned because I can't make a bad mistake if the nominating commission sends me 3 people that are qualified to do the job, and he says, so far that's happened. So he says, it's kind of a good news, bad news. The good news is I can't mess this up. The bad news is I have to pick one. And I've heard governors say the toughest thing is to pick one.